Hello everyone, and welcome to another video lesson brought to you by practical.org, where we give you practical solutions for your classroom technology. Today's video lesson is actually part of a series of lessons that are all about creating a literary essay. This is the first of the videos which deals with the first and one of the most important parts of writing a literary essay, and that's creating a thesis statement. So, let's get started. When most students hear their teacher say it's time to craft a thesis statement, they kind of freak out a little bit. Why? Because the term thesis statement isn't exactly one most people are too familiar with. I don't think, you go up to your friends on a Saturday night and say, "Hey man, how's your thesis statement for the literary essay going?" Because of this, there is a lot of confusion and sometimes even fear when it comes to this term. Oftentimes students say, "Oh, what?" But what I'd like to do is kind of break down that confusion and that fear right now by telling you one really important fact, and that is that a thesis statement is the same thing as an argument. Now, that is something everyone is used to, whether it's with a sibling, a parent, a friend, or even a teacher. Every student has experience with arguments. For example, you might argue, Justin Bieber is really talented. Or maybe you're too afraid to argue that, but you really feel it deep down inside. Or maybe you want to argue that the New York Yankees is the best baseball team of all time. Either way, the point is we all know how to make arguments. So that's it. That seems really simple. We're just going to be writing an essay about Justin Bieber or something. No, it's not quite that simple. Because we're not just creating a thesis statement, are we? What we're doing is we are creating a literary thesis statement. Okay, so what does that word literary mean? Well, literary is actually pretty simple. Literary means it's just based on literature. So, when it comes down to it, when a teacher says you need to craft a literary thesis statement, even though that might sound scary, what they're really saying in kind of normal people language is you need to make an argument about a book, story, or poem that you're reading. And that's something I think everybody can definitely handle. So let's get to it. The issue, though, with creating now an argument about something that you're reading is a lot of students will immediately say an argument like, okay, make an argument about a book. Harry Potter is my favorite book. Or Green Eggs and Ham was a riveting tale. Are these two things arguments about literature? Sure, but are they really good quality thesis statements? Well, not really if you've advanced beyond the first grade. They're just a little bit too basic. So then the question is, how do we make a good intellectual argument about literature? Well, the best way to do that is to use literary elements to inspire us. So what I'm going to do now is just list a bunch of really common literary elements that you've definitely heard your teacher talk about in class, like setting, character traits, character change, character relationships or character comparisons, symbolism, theme, and lastly, I'll just put down other for any other kind of literary element that you'd like to go through. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a series of thesis statements that are inspired by each of these literary elements. Now, you probably haven't read some of the sample books I'm going to use, but that's completely fine. These are just meant to be models for what a good thesis statement looks like. So you don't have to have read the stories I referenced for them to help you out as you create your own thesis statements. So the first thing I'd like to show you is a setting thesis statement. What does an argument about setting look like? Well, it might look something like this. The opening setting of Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge establishes an ominous mood for the rest of the story. So if you notice something about the setting that seems really important or significant, write it down, and that could be your thesis statement. That's what I did here about this short story. Next is a pretty basic one, and this is really good for beginners with literary essays. This is going to be a character trait. So for me, I did it based on a book called A Separate Piece, and I said Finney from A Separate Piece is a naive character. For you, you could keep this really simple, or you could make it more complex. Maybe you just want to say that, Harry Potter is a brave character. Well, there you go. That's a character trait thesis statement. It can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. Next is a character change one, and this one is just what it sounds like. It's how a character changes over the course of the book, and that happens all the time, so this is a really easy one to do. Over the course of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Huck gradually frees himself from the clutches of Southern society. Sure, that one sounds complex, but if you wanted to do something as basic as, a character changes from being really miserly and greedy to being really generous, maybe that happens in a book you've read, or something else happens to a character in a book you've read. You can definitely use that too. Next, character relationship or comparison. For me, I chose to do a comparison. So in the short story A Retrieve for Reformation, Jimmy Valentine and Ben Price are remarkably similar. Let's say you're reading a story and you realize two characters are really similar. That's a good thesis statement. Let's say you're reading two different stories, two different books, and you notice characters from different books are really similar. That would make a good thesis statement too. Next is symbolism. This one makes for some really good thesis statements if you want to try it. For me, I said the turtle crossing the road in Grapes of Wrath is symbolic of the struggles the Joad family faces on their journey west. So for me, I was saying this one object or this one creature is actually representative of something bigger. If you're reading your book and you notice that there's some object or some moment that seems to be representative of something even bigger, write that down, and that's your symbolic thesis statement. Next, you can choose theme. Theme just being an overarching kind of message for the story. So for Grapes of Wrath again, I said the saving power of family is the central theme of Grapes of Wrath. So if your story has a message, which every story does, write it down, and that's your thesis statement. And lastly, let's say you think of an idea that doesn't really fit into any of the categories above. Just write it down. So for me, I really liked this idea of foreshadowing in the story Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. So I said Ambrose Bierce, who's the author, creatively foreshadows the fact that Peyton Farquhar's escape in Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is imagined. So if you're reading a story and you notice some other literary element, whether it's irony, whether it's foreshadowing, whether it's tone, feel free to write that down, and that'll make a good thesis statement for you. So, now that you know how to create a good quality literary thesis statement, I have one final tip to watch out for, because a lot of students kind of mess this up. And that final tip is you need to present an argument, not a statement of fact. If you simply state a fact in your thesis statement, your essay is doomed. So let's do a few exercises just to make sure you fully understand this concept. So going back to our good friend JB, of course I'm referring to Justin Bieber. If I present to you Justin Bieber has brown eyes, and then I present to you Justin Bieber is really talented, which of those two would be an argument, and which of those two would simply be a fact? You can pause if you'd like a moment before I reveal the answer. The answer is that Justin Bieber is really talented is an argument, whereas Justin Bieber has brown eyes is a fact. You're not going to be able to make an essay about that, so make sure you burn it up, you get rid of it. Okay? Next, let's go back to that idea of the New York Yankees. The New York Yankees is the greatest baseball team versus Derek Jeter played for the New York Yankees. Again, in this instance, the top one would be the argument. You can actually write an essay about that, whereas the bottom one would be kind of like a one-sentence essay because it's not really making an argument at all. So again, we'll burn that one up. Now that you understand that concept with the simple examples of Justin Bieber and the Yankees, let's try one where it's actually with a piece of literature. So, Hester Prynne wears a scarlet A in The Scarlet Letter versus, in The Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne's scarlet A is representative of the many burdens she shoulders over the course of the novel. Again, you can pause if you want to try this one out for yourself, but the answer here is pretty clearly the second one. Why? Because the second one is an argument about a symbol whereas the first one is just kind of stating a fact from the book, which does not lead to a good essay. So we'll burn that one up. And that is about it for crafting a literary thesis statement. You now know everything you need to know to create a really good one. So tonight for homework, what I'd like you to do is take notes on this video so that you can use them as a reference as you work on creating thesis statements in class tomorrow. And of course, a hint, pausing the video will help you with taking notes. I definitely recommend, as far as notes go, you go back and write down some of those example thesis statements, because those examples are going to be your best friend when it comes to creating your own. In class tomorrow, what we're going to do is create at least 8 different thesis statements based on literature we have covered this year. And you are going to be sure to use a variety of thesis types, like character, setting, symbolism, theme, etc. And the really good news is, I'll be right there with you tomorrow to help you out as you try to create those thesis statements using the models and using the information you learned in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this, be sure to check out practical.org to see some other good video lessons that you can definitely learn from. Thank you.